The summer heat pressed down on Darmstadt that June afternoon in 1974. West Germany shimmered under an oppressive sun. Inside a modest apartment, Admiral Dönitz sat frozen at his wooden desk. The book before him might as well have been a death sentence. Its pages contained secrets that had remained buried for 3 decades. Page 1 to 17 lay open. The English words had been carefully translated by his aide. Each sentence struck like a physical blow. The old man's weathered fingers trembled as they gripped the book's edges. At 83, he had lived through Germany's rise and catastrophic fall. He had commanded the feared U-boat fleet that once terrorized Allied shipping. Now he faced the most devastating revelation of his long life. The translated text burned before his eyes. From May 1940 onwards, the passage read, "The Allies had broken German naval communications." They read Wehrmacht traffic almost as quickly as German commanders themselves. His aide stood nearby, watching the color drain from his commander's weathered face. The old admiral's mouth opened slightly. No words came. For 30 years since Germany's surrender, he had carried the weight of 30,000 dead submariners. Those young men had died beneath the cold Atlantic waters. Their U-boats had been crushed by depth charges, torpedoed by destroyers, hunted down like animals by aircraft that always seemed to know exactly where to look. Dönitz had blamed superior Allied technology, better radar systems, overwhelming industrial production, more aircraft, larger escort fleets. Anything except the truth now staring him in the face. Every tactical order he had transmitted to his wolf packs had been intercepted. Every innovative strategy had been read by British intelligence. Often the enemy knew his plans before his own submarine commanders received them. The magnitude of this betrayal crushed down on him like the ocean itself. 783 U-boats lost. 30,000 of Germany's finest young men sent to watery graves. All because the encryption system he had trusted absolutely had been systematically compromised since 1941. His hands shook as he reached for paper to compose a hasty letter to the book's publisher. The words came out defensive and hollow. He had always suspected this possibility, he would claim. But everyone who knew him understood this was desperate rationalization. Throughout the entire war, whenever subordinates had raised security concerns about Enigma, the admiral had dismissed them with crushing certainty. The mathematical foundation was unbreakable, he had insisted. German cryptographers had proven this beyond doubt. Now the truth mocked his certainty. The Enigma machine that had seemed so sophisticated sat in museums as a monument to failure. Its rotating wheels and electrical circuits had been no match for Polish mathematicians and British code breakers working with primitive computing machines. The theoretical security had been overwhelming. Standard 3-rotor Wehrmacht Enigma machines offered 17,576 possible rotor positions. Multiply that by 60 different rotor arrangements, and you reached over 1 million primary configurations. Add the plugboard connections with their astronomical number of combinations, and the total possibilities soared into the trillions. Dr. Erich Huttenheim had headed the Wehrmacht's cipher department throughout the war. He understood perfectly that breaking Enigma through brute force mathematical analysis was theoretically possible. But he had calculated the enormous effort required would exceed human capability. To test every possible Enigma setting would require teams of trained cryptanalysts working continuously for periods longer than the age of the universe. Even if enemy forces captured the machines, without daily changing keys distributed in carefully guarded codebooks, they would need to solve each day's settings anew. German mathematicians had calculated this would require thousands of trained operators working around the clock. The numbers seemed to guarantee absolute security. No nation possessed such resources. No enemy would attempt such an impossible task. The Kriegsmarine had taken additional precautions that appeared to make the system completely impregnable. Admiral Dönitz had instituted the most stringent cryptographic protocols in the entire German military structure. Naval Enigma operators received specialized training at the Marine Nachrichtenschule in Flensburg-Mürwik. They spent months learning not just technical operation, but security procedures designed to make interception meaningless even if it occurred. Codebooks were printed using water-soluble red ink on special pink paper. This material would dissolve completely within 30 seconds of contact with seawater. Special weighted bags ensured the materials would sink immediately if thrown overboard during emergency situations. U-boat commanders carried personal sidearms with standing orders to shoot any crew member who failed to destroy cryptographic materials when capture seemed imminent. The penalties for security breaches were severe and immediate. The introduction of the four-rotor M4 Enigma machine for U-boats on February 1, 1942, had seemed like the ultimate evolution in cryptographic security. Germans codenamed this system Triton. Allied cryptanalysts called it Shark. With 8 rotors to choose from compared to 5 for other services, and the fourth rotor adding another factor of complexity, the number of possible configurations increased by a factor of 26. German cryptanalysts at B-Dienst had conducted their own comprehensive security assessment. The 100-day project, called 100 Tage Arbeit, attempted to break their own naval cipher using every known cryptanalytic technique available. 3 separate attempts had failed completely. Not even German experts could penetrate their own system. Vice Admiral Erhard Mertens reported to Dönitz with complete confidence that their cipher appeared unbreakable through any known method. Throughout 1941 and 1942, inexplicable patterns had begun emerging that should have triggered massive alarm bells throughout German naval intelligence. Each incident was explained away through alternative reasoning. British radar had improved dramatically. Aerial reconnaissance had become more systematic. Sometimes it was simply attributed to bad luck. Anything except the possibility that Enigma had been systematically compromised from the beginning. The systematic destruction of German supply ships in spring 1941 represented the first major warning sign that went completely unheeded. Between March and June 1941, the Royal Navy had intercepted and destroyed 7 of 9 German supply vessels. These ships had been positioned in remote areas of the Atlantic specifically to refuel and resupply surface raiders and U-boats. The Belgian had been positioned 300 miles north of the Azores when discovered on March 3rd. The SO Hamburg, hidden in a remote bay, fell on March 5th. The Egerland and Nordmark followed in quick succession. These vessels had been stationed in locations so remote that chance discovery seemed statistically impossible. The probability of British patrols accidentally finding ships in millions of square miles of empty ocean approached absolute zero. When Captain Ludwig Stummel of B-Dienst investigated these catastrophic losses, his official report concluded that British success must be attributed to dramatically improved radar technology and systematic ocean surveillance patterns. The possibility that British intelligence was reading German position reports remained unconsidered in the official investigation. The destruction of the Bismarck in May 1941 should have raised even more serious questions about communications security. Germany's most powerful battleship, the pride of the entire Kriegsmarine, had been hunted down with uncanny precision after breaking into the Atlantic. When Luftwaffe General Hans Jeschonek received reports that British aircraft seemed to know exactly where to search. In the vast expanses of the Norwegian Sea and North Atlantic, he dismissed subordinate security concerns with crushing certainty. It was impossible that enemy forces were reading German ciphers. Specialists had established this beyond any reasonable doubt. Nowhere was this hidden catastrophe more evident than in the escalating Battle of the Atlantic. U-boat losses began climbing steadily from late 1941 onwards, despite continuous tactical innovations and significant technological improvements. Dönitz noted in his war diary entry for January 12, 1942, his complete mystification at the interception of supply submarine U-459 in an impossibly remote location 800 nautical miles west of Freetown. His inquiry to Berlin brought the standard response from naval intelligence. Insight into German cipher systems did not come into consideration. The statistics told a story of systematic destruction that defied conventional explanation. In 1941, Germany had lost 35 U-boats. In 1942, despite adding the fourth rotor to Enigma machines, losses climbed to 85 submarines. By 1943, they reached absolutely catastrophic proportions, with 237 submarines destroyed in a single year. May 1943 alone, which German submariners called Black May, saw 41 U-boats sent to the bottom. This represented over one-third of all boats at sea during that period. German analysts consistently found alternative explanations for each disaster. When convoys began taking seemingly impossible evasive actions, avoiding wolf packs with uncanny precision, Dönitz blamed Allied aircraft equipped with revolutionary new radar systems. When U-boats were caught on the surface with disturbing frequency, German scientists theorized that British forces had developed radar capable of detecting submarines at ranges up to 60 nautical miles. This represented a technological impossibility given known radar capabilities at the time. But it seemed more believable to German minds than the possibility of cryptographic compromise. The mounting losses triggered increasingly desperate investigations by German intelligence services. Each investigation was more thorough than the last. All suffered from the same fundamental blind spot: the unshakable assumption that Enigma remained absolutely secure. The most revealing investigation began after the capture of U-570 by British forces on August 27, 1941. The submarine had surrendered to a British Hudson bomber after suffering damage south of Iceland. It was potentially captured intact with all its cryptographic materials. Captain Ludwig Stummel of B-Dienst was assigned to investigate the complete security implications. His investigation was meticulous and thorough. He interviewed survivors extensively. He analyzed the submarine's last transmitted messages. He reconstructed the probable timeline of its capture with scientific precision. Stummel's October 1941 report revealed the cognitive trap that would persist throughout the entire war. He acknowledged that if British forces had captured the Enigma machine and code books intact, they could theoretically read German naval traffic for a limited period. But he immediately dismissed this possibility as operationally meaningless. The doubt required about compromise of secret operations could not be justified, he wrote. German cipher systems did not appear to be broken through any known method. His reasoning followed what seemed like completely impeccable logic. Even if British forces possessed captured machines and current keys, they would lose this capability when keys changed on November 1st. Furthermore, proper protocol demanded immediate destruction of all cryptographic materials. It must be assumed that submarine crews had fulfilled their duty. What Stummel could not know was that U-110 had been captured completely intact 3 months earlier on May 9, 1941. This provided British intelligence with not just an Enigma machine, but crucial codebooks and complete operating procedures. The boarding party from HMS Bulldog, led by Sub-Lieutenant David Baum, had found the submarine's radio room completely undisturbed. Code books were spread across the table. The Enigma machine was still warm from recent use. Among the captured materials were settings for high-level officer-only signals. The short signal codebooks revealed how Germans compressed messages to defeat Allied direction-finding efforts. Everything British codebreakers needed to achieve systematic penetration. The investigation that should have exposed everything came in spring 1943. The catastrophic losses of Black May prompted Admiral Dönitz to order the most comprehensive security review of the entire war. The investigation team, led by Korvettenkapitän Meckel, explored multiple hypotheses with impressive thoroughness. Their first theory involved the METOX radar warning receivers carried by U-boats. German scientists hypothesized these devices might be re-radiating detectable signals that betrayed submarine positions. A Focke-Wulf 200 Condor aircraft equipped with detection equipment confirmed that METOX emissions could indeed be detected at ranges up to 110 kilometers. All U-boats were immediately ordered to cease using radar detection equipment. When losses continued completely unabated, the investigation moved to alternative theories. Perhaps Allied forces had developed infrared detection systems capable of spotting heat signatures from submarine diesel engines. German naval technical departments launched a crash program to develop special infrared-absorbing paint. U-boats returning from patrol were hastily repainted with experimental coating. Still, the losses mounted relentlessly. The breakthrough seemed to come when a crashed RAF bomber near Rotterdam yielded an intact H-2S radar system on February 3, 1943. German scientists were stunned to discover British forces had developed centimetric radar, operating on wavelengths their detection equipment could not receive. This revelation triggered another crash program to develop new detection gear. The first Naxos radar detectors reached U-boats in September 1943. Still, the systematic destruction continued. Throughout these exhaustive investigations, one hypothesis remained notably absent from serious consideration. As Admiral Erhard Mertens reasoned in his 1941 assessment, breaking Enigma would require a perfect chain of unlikely events. The capture of machines and current keys. The solution of security procedures. The breaking of officer-only signals. Sufficient time for cryptanalysis before keys changed. He concluded these requirements were individually unlikely and collectively impossible. Paradoxically, Germany's own remarkable success in breaking Allied codes reinforced their absolute faith in Enigma's security. B-Dienst had achieved extraordinary success penetrating British naval ciphers. This achievement convinced German leadership they understood the cryptographic game being played. Kapitän zur See Heinz Bonatz, who led B-Dienst's English language section, had broken British naval cipher number 3, used for convoy communications. By December 1942, his team was reading 80% of intercepted British convoy messages, often within hours of transmission. Wilhelm Tranow, Germany's most gifted naval cryptanalyst, could predict convoy movements 10 to 20 hours in advance. This allowed U-boats to position themselves perfectly for intercept operations. This success created a dangerous psychological dynamic throughout German naval intelligence. Officers reasoned that if breaking codes required such enormous effort and specialized talent, B-Dienst employed over 5,000 personnel at its peak, then surely British forces faced similar or greater challenges attacking Enigma. They knew from direct experience that even with captured codebooks, maintaining continuous access to enemy communications required constant vigilance. Frequent failures occurred when codes changed or procedures were modified. What they failed to recognize was that while they celebrated reading British convoy routes, British intelligence was reading virtually everything else: U-boat positions, patrol orders, supply arrangements, tactical innovations, even Dönitz's personal assessments sent directly to Hitler. The Germans were winning tactical victories while losing the strategic war, but their tactical successes blinded them completely to the strategic catastrophe unfolding. The supreme irony came in spring 1943, when B-Dienst's success actually accelerated German defeat. Reading British convoy communications, Tranov could position wolf packs with perfect precision for intercept operations. But British intelligence, reading both German positioning orders and their own compromised communications, knew exactly where U-boats were gathering. They would route convoys around the wolf packs, while vectoring hunter-killer groups directly onto waiting submarines. The Germans celebrated their code-breaking success even as their U-boats sailed into carefully prepared traps. Captain Heinz Bonatz would later write in his unpublished memoirs about growing suspicions in late 1943. The enemy seemed to possess uncanny knowledge of German dispositions. Convoys would alter course at the last possible moment, always just beyond patrol lines. Supply submarines were caught at remote refueling points with impossible frequency. It was as if British forces could see German operations unfolding in real time. Yet when he raised these concerns with superiors, he was told repeatedly that Enigma's security had been mathematically proven beyond doubt. The preservation of the ultra-secret represented one of the most successful deception operations in military history. Winston Churchill famously called Bletchley Park the goose that laid golden eggs but never cackled. He understood that strategic advantage from reading German communications far outweighed any tactical benefit from acting on specific intelligence. The security architecture surrounding Ultra was unprecedented in scope and effectiveness. Group Captain Frederick Winterbottom, appointed by Secret Intelligence Service Chief Stuart Menzies, established the Special Liaison Unit system in 1940. These units, eventually numbering 40 worldwide, maintained absolute control over ultra-intelligence distribution. Each SLU officer was personally vetted by Winterbottom. They signed the Official Secrets Act with clear understanding that violation meant execution for treason, even after the war ended. Physical security measures at Bletchley Park itself bordered on absolute paranoia. The estate's 580 acres were surrounded by military police posts. Over 9,000 personnel worked in complete compartmentalization. Codebreakers in Hut 8 working on naval Enigma had no knowledge of work in Hut 6 on Wehrmacht traffic. Even within huts, personnel knew only their specific assigned tasks. A translator might spend years rendering German messages into English without knowing their source or ultimate significance. To mask the source of ultra-intelligence, British forces created increasingly elaborate deceptions. The original cover story involved a fictional super spy network codenamed Boniface. This was supposedly run by an anti-Nazi German officer in Berlin with access to highest-level communications. When acting on ultra-intelligence, false reconnaissance flights were routinely conducted to provide plausible discovery stories. After using ultra-intelligence to destroy an Italian convoy bound for North Africa, British forces transmitted a radio message in a cipher they knew Germans had broken, thanking a non-existent agent in Naples for vital information. The most sophisticated deception involved careful calibration of action versus inaction. The Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, under Commander Roger Wynne, developed precise protocols for using ultra-intelligence effectively. Attacks on U-boats were timed to occur only after plausible detection opportunities. A chance aircraft sighting or surface vessel contact. When Ultra revealed U-boat refueling rendezvous, attacks were delayed until submarines had been together long enough that discovery might seem coincidental. Sometimes preserving Ultra meant accepting terrible losses. On November 14, 1940, German bombers devastated Coventry in a raid that killed 568 civilians. Post-war mythology claimed Churchill knew from Enigma decrypts that Coventry was the target but refused to evacuate the city to protect Ultra. Declassified documents reveal a more complex truth. Enigma had revealed Operation Moonlight Sonata was planned, but initially indicated 5 possible targets. When radio beam navigation finally confirmed Coventry as the target just hours before the raid, immediate defensive measures were taken, including fighter patrols and anti-aircraft reinforcements. The story of Churchill's sacrifice was itself a post-war deception to hide actual capabilities and limitations of ultra-intelligence. March 25, 1941. In Hut 8 at Bletchley Park, a young woman named Mavis Lever sat hunched over intercepted Italian naval messages. She had been working 16-hour days attempting to break the Italian naval Enigma variant. Suddenly, the patterns clicked into place. The message she decoded was electric in its implications. Today, 25 out of March, is day -3 for the start of the operation. Mavis immediately understood the significance. The Italian fleet was planning a major operation in exactly 3 days. Working through the night with her colleague Margaret Rock, she decoded additional messages revealing the complete Italian battle plan. Admiral Angelo Iachino would sortie with the battleship Vittorio Veneto, 6 heavy cruisers, and 17 destroyers to attack British convoys between Egypt and Greece. The intelligence reached Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commanding the British Mediterranean Fleet in Alexandria, within hours. Cunningham, a theatrical commander who understood the importance of deception, spent March 27th ostentatiously playing golf at the Alexandria Sporting Club. Italian spies would report the British fleet showed no signs of preparation. That night, after returning to his flagship HMS Warspite with studied casualness, he ordered the fleet to sea. The Italian fleet had no idea they were sailing into a carefully prepared ambush. British torpedo bombers from carrier HMS Formidable struck first, damaging Vittorio Veneto and crippling heavy cruiser Pola. When Italian cruisers Zara and Fiume returned to assist Pola after dark, they sailed directly into the guns of Cunningham's battleships at point-blank range. In minutes, both cruisers and 2 destroyers were destroyed. Over 2,400 Italian sailors died, including Admiral Carlo Cataneo and the captains of all 3 lost cruisers. Admiral Iachino, surviving aboard the damaged Vittorio Veneto, attributed the disaster to British radar superiority and lucky reconnaissance. In his after-action report, he wrote that enemy discovery of Italian forces must be attributed to superior aerial reconnaissance and radar technology, which allowed tracking of movements even at night. The possibility that British forces had been reading Italian naval orders for days never entered Italian or German analysis. The psychological impact rippled through Axis naval planning. Hitler, already skeptical of surface naval warfare after the loss of Graf Spee, saw Matapan as confirmation that the Mediterranean was a British lake. The Italian fleet, which had posed significant threat to British convoys, never again attempted major offensive operations. Now, sitting in his apartment in 1974, Admiral Dönitz finally understood the complete scope of the deception that had destroyed his U-boat force and cost Germany the war. Throughout those devastating months, German and Italian military leaders remained completely unaware that mathematical analysis, rather than aerial surveillance or electronic detection systems, had sealed their doom. The night of May 18, 1941 brought a crucial moment. The hour approached 11:30 p.m. at Bletchley Park. Inside Hut 8, mechanical sounds suddenly filled the air. The teleprinter began its urgent clatter. A German naval transmission had been intercepted. The message traveled across radio waves into British hands. Harry Hinsley sat at his desk in the cramped workspace. This young man was only 21 years old. He had left his Cambridge studies to become a code breaker. His trained eyes scanned the intercepted text. Recognition struck him immediately. The significance was unmistakable. Admiral Gunther Lütjens had transmitted orders from his flagship. The battleship Bismarck was departing from Gotenhafen. Modern maps call this port Gdynia. The mission was Operation Rhine Exercise. German naval forces would raid Atlantic shipping routes. Months of British naval planning suddenly crystallized into action. British Admiralty officials had dreaded this exact moment. Bismarck represented their worst nightmare scenario. The German battleship carried devastating firepower. 8 15-inch guns dominated its main battery. Advanced fire control systems guided every shot. No British cruiser could survive direct engagement. Any battleship capable of fighting Bismarck lacked the speed to catch it. If this monster reached the Atlantic shipping lanes, carnage would follow. Merchant vessels would die by the dozen. Supply lines would be severed. Britain's survival hung in the balance. But ultra-intelligence had provided precious advance warning. The Royal Navy gained time to prepare their response. Admiral John Tovey commanded the home fleet. He positioned his forces to intercept the German threat. Force H, under Admiral James Somerville, steamed north from Gibraltar. Every movement was calculated and deliberate. The cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Suffolk took their assigned positions. They waited in the Denmark Strait with specific orders. Their mission was to shadow using new Type 284 radar. Electronic eyes would track the enemy through fog and darkness. German messages had revealed every detail in advance. Each British movement was choreographed perfectly. When Bismarck finally appeared in the Denmark Strait on May 23rd, the British claimed lucky reconnaissance. HMS Suffolk received credit for the spotting. Reality was far different. Ultra-intelligence had revealed not just the German route. The precise timetable was also known. The battle that followed brought unexpected tragedy. HMS Hood exploded and sank within minutes. This tactical disaster caught the British unprepared. But strategic victory remained assured through electronic eavesdropping. Bismarck had suffered damage during the engagement. Oil leaked from ruptured fuel tanks. Radar-equipped shadowers maintained contact. Their positions were updated through continuing Enigma intercepts. Admiral Lütjens made a critical error on May 25th. British radar contact had been temporarily lost. The German commander was unaware of this development. He transmitted a lengthy radio message to Naval Group West. The transmission described his battle damage and future intentions. Radio waves carried his words for over 30 minutes. British direction-finding stations had ample time to plot his position. Multiple listening posts triangulated the source. But more importantly, the message reached Bletchley Park quickly. Codebreakers decoded the transmission within hours. Bismarck was heading for Brest. Fuel supplies were insufficient for evasive maneuvering. The final act played out with mechanical precision. Catalina flying boats spotted Bismarck exactly where ultra-intelligence predicted. Swordfish torpedo bombers launched from HMS Ark Royal. They operated at extreme range in terrible weather conditions. Yet somehow, they achieved the critical hit. Bismarck's rudder jammed in position. The morning of May 27th brought converging British battleships. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney closed the distance. They pounded Bismarck into twisted scrap metal. Of 22 to 21 German sailors aboard, only 114 survived the carnage. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder commanded the Kriegsmarine. He analyzed this disaster with mounting frustration. How had the British maintained contact across thousands of ocean miles? How had they concentrated overwhelming force at precisely the right moment? His investigation reached predictable conclusions. British naval aviation had exceeded German expectations. Radar technology had advanced beyond their intelligence estimates. The possibility of compromised communications never entered consideration. Years later, Rader wrote his memoirs before Ultra was revealed. He attributed the loss to mechanical failure and enemy luck. He never suspected that luck played no role whatsoever. May 1943 arrived with Admiral Dönitz commanding history's largest U-boat fleet. 116 submarines patrolled North Atlantic waters. They were organized into wolf packs with predatory names. Fink meant finch. Amsel meant blackbird. Meise meant titmouse. Star maintained its English meaning. German naval cryptanalysts were reading British convoy codes successfully. Dönitz felt victory was within his grasp. "The enemy shows signs of exhaustion," he wrote in his war diary on May 1st. "One more concentrated effort will cut the Atlantic supply line." What Dönitz could never know was devastating. Bletchley Park had achieved a cryptanalytic breakthrough. This development would seal his fleet's fate permanently. After 10 months of darkness caused by 4-rotor Enigma, British codebreakers had mastered the M4 cipher. They used captured codebooks from U-559. These had been recovered by sailors who drowned retrieving them from the sinking submarine. The world's first programmable electronic computer, Colossus, processed the information. German naval traffic was again being read within hours of transmission. The first convoy battle of May established the pattern. Convoy ONS-5 consisted of 42 merchant ships. They were bound from Liverpool to Halifax. U-650 spotted them on April 28th. Dönitz concentrated 3 wolf packs for the attack. 41 U-boats moved into position. Reading his every order, the Admiralty reinforced the convoy escort. Additional forces were routed to intercept. The battle raged for 6 days across 600 miles of ocean. German submarines sank 13 merchant vessels, but the cost was terrible for Germany. 7 U-boats were destroyed by convoy escorts. U-192, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Werner Happe, was depth-charged by HMS Lüsestreif. U-638 went down with all hands after ramming by HMS Sunflower. U-125, U-531, U-438, U-630, and U-528 followed in quick succession. For the first time in the war, exchange rates favored the Allies, but this was merely the beginning of slaughter. As May progressed, each convoy battle became a massacre of German submarines. Reading German deployment orders, the Allies routed convoys through gaps in patrol lines. Hunter-killer groups were vectored directly onto Wolfpack assembly points. Aircraft equipped with new Lee lights caught U-boats charging batteries on the surface during nighttime hours. Ships equipped with Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars achieved kill rates that stunned their own commanders. Convoy HX-237 crossed in mid-May. It destroyed 3 U-boats without losing a single merchant vessel. Convoy SC-130 sank 5 submarines while suffering no losses. The new escort carrier USS Bogue operated with perfect intelligence from Ultra. It sank 6 U-boats in as many weeks. German submarines were being destroyed faster than replacement was possible. Experienced commanders who had survived years of warfare were dying in waters they had once dominated. The statistics were catastrophic beyond belief. In May 1943, Germany lost 41 U-boats. This represented nearly 25% of the operational fleet. 7 were destroyed by aircraft in the Bay of Biscay. They were caught trying to leave or return to base. 6 were caught refueling from submarine tankers at coordinates revealed by Ultra. 12 were killed by convoy escorts that seemed to anticipate every movement. The youngest victim was U-209 on its first patrol. It was destroyed with all 50 hands on May 7th. The most experienced was U-192, whose commander had survived 12 previous patrols. It was sent to the bottom on May 6th. On May 24th, Dönitz issued the order marking the effective end of the Battle of the Atlantic. All U-boats were to withdraw from North Atlantic convoy routes. They would regroup in waters southwest of the Azores. In his war diary, he wrote simply, "We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic." He attributed the defeat to Allied radar and aircraft. He never suspected that his own communications had orchestrated his fleet's destruction. One of the most remarkable aspects of the ultra-secret was how close Germans came to discovering the truth. Allied intelligence deliberately misdirected their investigations. The most sophisticated disruption involved the Lucy Ring. This Soviet spy network operated from Switzerland. It seemed to have extraordinary access to German military secrets. Rudolf Rössler was codenamed Lucy. This German refugee publisher lived in Lucerne. He ran a supposedly independent intelligence network. From 1942 onwards, Lucy provided Soviet intelligence with remarkably accurate information about German military operations. His focus was particularly the Eastern Front. His reports included detailed Wehrmacht order of battle. Offensive plans were described precisely. Even verbatim texts of Hitler's operational directives appeared. Information was so precise and timely that both German and Soviet intelligence suspected highest-level sources within the Wehrmacht. German counterintelligence launched multiple investigations into the Lucy Ring. They were convinced a major traitor existed in their high command. The Abwehr and Gestapo investigated dozens of senior officers. This included members of the Wehrmacht operations staff with access to Enigma traffic. What they never discovered was the truth. Lucy's information came not from traitors, but from Bletchley Park. It was laundered through Swiss intelligence to disguise its true source. The British faced a delicate problem with their Soviet allies. Soviet forces desperately needed ultra-intelligence to counter German offensives, but Stalin was deeply suspicious of British motives. He was unlikely to trust intelligence from capitalist allies. Moreover, directly sharing ultra with the Soviets risked exposure. Their communication methods were less secure. Potential German agents within Soviet intelligence posed additional risks. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Ultra-intelligence was selectively passed to Swiss intelligence. They fed it to Rössler with a cover story. It supposedly came from anti-Nazi officers in the Wehrmacht. Rössler then transmitted it to Soviet intelligence through his handler, Alexander Rado. The Soviets believed they had their own source independent of Western allies. They acted on the intelligence with confidence. The Germans, discovering the accuracy of Lucy's reports through their own agents, launched investigations. These pointed everywhere except Bletchley Park. Throughout 1943 and 1944, evidence of Allied foreknowledge accumulated to undeniable levels. Yet German investigators, trapped by their fundamental assumption of Enigma's security, consistently found alternative explanations. The systematic destruction of U-boat supply submarines provided the most obvious evidence. These milk cow submarines operated at secret refueling points in remote Atlantic areas. Their positions were known only to U-boat command and the submarines they were scheduled to supply. Between June and August 1943, 10 of 14 supply submarines were destroyed. Most were caught at their refueling coordinates. U-459 was destroyed on July 24th. While refueling U-117, it went down at a position 500 miles from the nearest shipping lane. U-489 was caught on August 4th at coordinates transmitted just 48 hours earlier. Kapitän zur See Hermann Mohr investigated these losses for naval intelligence. He wrote in his report, The probability of chance discovery of our supply operations is mathematically negligible. Either the enemy has developed detection capabilities beyond our current understanding, or we have a serious breach of security. Yet his investigation focused entirely on possible human intelligence sources. He examined crew members who might have been turned. He investigated neutral sailors who might have observed departure patterns. He even considered the possibility of Allied agents with radio transmitters near French bases. The idea that the British were simply reading German position reports was never seriously considered. Even more damning evidence came from the precision of Allied operations against new German weapons and tactics. When Germany introduced the acoustic torpedo in September 1943, it was designed to home in on convoy escort propellers. The Allies immediately deployed effective countermeasures. Noise-making devices towed behind escorts decoyed the torpedoes away from their targets. The German explanation remained consistent. Allied intelligence must have captured sample torpedoes from destroyed U-boats. When U-boats began using new courier burst radio transmissions in 1944, messages were compressed into less than half a second to defeat direction finding. Allied forces still managed to locate and attack submarines with disturbing accuracy. The German conclusion followed predictable patterns. The Allies must have developed direction-finding equipment capable of detecting even these brief transmissions. The Japanese naval attaché in Berlin, Captain Yokoi Tadao, provided perhaps the most telling observation. After analyzing the pattern of Allied operations in 1944, he reported to Tokyo, "The precision of enemy intelligence suggests they are reading German communications. This seems impossible given German security measures, but no other explanation fits the evidence." His report was intercepted and decoded by American cryptanalysts who had broken Japanese diplomatic codes. It caused brief concern at Bletchley Park. Fortunately, German naval intelligence dismissed Japanese concerns as face-saving excuses for their own intelligence failures in the Pacific. Admiral Dönitz represented perhaps the most tragic figure in German cryptographic blindness. He was widely regarded as a brilliant tactician and inspirational leader. His very competence became a barrier to recognizing the truth. His centralized command system, which he considered his greatest innovation, had become the instrument of his fleet's destruction. Dönitz had revolutionized submarine warfare through his Rudel tactic. Centralized tactical control operated from his headquarters. Using powerful radio transmitters, he personally directed Wolfpack operations from situation rooms. These were located in Lorient, Paris, and finally Berlin. Every U-boat commander reported position, fuel state, torpedo inventory, and contact reports. Dönitz would then orchestrate attacks like a conductor directing a symphony. He vectored boats onto convoys with precise timing and positioning. This system required constant radio communication. This was exactly what allowed Bletchley Park to track every U-boat in the Atlantic. Dönitz transmitted over 70 radio messages daily to his fleet. Each one was decoded by British cryptanalysts. His detailed orders revealed not just current positions, but future intentions, patrol patterns, and tactical innovations. Yet Dönitz's faith in his system never wavered. When subordinates questioned the wisdom of such extensive radio traffic, he responded with detailed technical explanations. The Enigma was unbreakable by computational standards. German radio discipline was superior to any navy in history. Short signal code books compressed messages to defeat direction finding. Frequency changes and call sign modifications prevented traffic analysis. In his mind, German technical superiority guaranteed security. His war diary reveals a commander increasingly frustrated by inexplicable Allied prescience, but he never questioned his fundamental assumptions. Entry after entry describes convoys taking impossible evasive actions. Escorts appeared at unlikely positions. Aircraft caught U-boats at improbable moments, yet his conclusions remained consistent. The Allies had more aircraft, better radar, superior resources. Never once did he write the obvious conclusion: they are reading our mail. The psychological investment in his command system made recognition impossible. To admit Enigma was compromised would mean acknowledging that his entire approach to submarine warfare was fundamentally flawed. The very innovation that had made him Hitler's chosen successor had been transparent to the enemy. Every order he had given, every tactical innovation he had developed, every submarine he had sent to its death had been visible to Allied codebreakers. The weight of such knowledge would have been crushing. Even after the war, before Ultra's revelation, Dönitz maintained absolute confidence in his wartime decisions. His memoirs, published in 1958, attributed U-boat losses to Allied material superiority and technological advancement. He calculated that Germany would have needed 300 submarines operational simultaneously to cut Britain's supply lines. He never realized that even 3,000 would have failed if the Allies continued reading his every command. May 9, 1946, brought the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. Admiral Dönitz stood in the dock defending his conduct of submarine warfare before Allied prosecutors. His testimony that day would unknowingly reveal the depth of German ignorance about Ultra. Simultaneously, it demonstrated how close he had come to the truth. The enemy's superiority in locating our submarines was overwhelming, Dönitz testified. By 1943, our losses had reached insupportable levels. I was forced to withdraw from the convoy routes. When pressed by prosecutors about specific incidents, Dönitz's explanations consistently avoided the real cause. Regarding the destruction of supply submarines at remote coordinates, he stated, "We suspected that the enemy had developed new long-range detection equipment, possibly using infrared or other emanations we could not detect. We also investigated the possibility of traitors, but found no evidence." When asked about convoys that seemed to avoid wolf packs with supernatural precision, Dönitz replied, "The enemy's air reconnaissance had reached saturation levels. They could maintain almost continuous surveillance of vast ocean areas. Combined with their radar capabilities, they could track our movements and route convoys accordingly." The prosecution was fully aware of Ultra, but bound by secrecy that would last another 28 years. They pressed Dönitz on specific intelligence failures without revealing their source. They asked about the interception of U-459 at precise refueling coordinates. They questioned the destruction of wolf packs at assembly points. They probed the failure of every major tactical innovation within weeks of implementation. To each question, Dönitz had a technical explanation: high-frequency direction finding, centimetric radar, talk between ships' radio systems that allowed instant coordination of escort groups, air-to-surface vessel radar, magnetic anomaly detection equipment, sonobuoys dropped by aircraft. Each explanation was partially correct. These technologies did exist and were employed effectively, but none addressed the fundamental intelligence advantage that made their application so devastating. The most telling exchange came when prosecutor Sir David Maxwell Fyfe questioned Dönitz about his investigations into security breaches. "Admiral, did you at any time suspect your communications were compromised?" "I investigated this possibility multiple times. Our cryptographic experts assured me that Enigma was mathematically secure. Breaking it would require resources beyond any nation's capability. Yet your losses continued to mount exponentially." "Yes, but this was due to enemy technological superiority, not intelligence failure. They had radar that could detect a periscope at 20 miles, aircraft that could appear without warning, weapon systems we could not counter. You never suspected they might be reading your radio traffic? Our communications were protected by the most sophisticated encryption system in existence. The possibility you suggest was examined and conclusively rejected by our finest mathematical minds. What makes this testimony particularly poignant in hindsight was Dönitz's obvious intelligence and analytical capability. His IQ had been tested at 138, well into the gifted range. He had correctly identified many Allied capabilities and innovations. He had asked the right questions and demanded thorough investigations. Yet the mental barrier created by faith in Enigma's security proved impermeable. Perhaps the most damning evidence of German institutional blindness came on August 10, 1943. Swiss intelligence, neutral and generally reliable, provided an explicit warning that should have triggered immediate action. The Swiss intelligence service, through sources that remain classified to this day, had learned of Allied cryptanalytic success against German naval codes. Their report was delivered through diplomatic channels to Admiral Dönitz of the Abwehr. It was stark in its implications. Over the last few months, Germany's naval ciphers, which are used to give operational orders to the U-boats, have been successfully broken. All orders are being read currently. The German response revealed the depth of their psychological investment in Enigma's security. Dönitz, informed of the Swiss report, wrote in his war diary on August 13th, "Report from Switzerland claims enemy is reading our cipher. This is unbelievable." He ordered yet another security review, but with predetermined conclusions. The investigation, led by Korvettenkapitän Meckel, dismissed the Swiss intelligence as Allied disinformation designed to undermine German confidence in their communications. The investigating committee's reasoning was revealing. If the Allies could read German naval communications, why hadn't they achieved even more devastating victories? Why did some convoys still blunder into wolf packs? Why did U-boats sometimes successfully evade hunter-killer groups? These questions had simple answers. The Allies deliberately allowed some losses to preserve their secret. But German investigators couldn't imagine such strategic restraint. German counterintelligence also investigated the source of Swiss information. They concluded it must have come from Allied agents attempting to create paranoia within the German naval command. The possibility that Swiss intelligence had simply observed the obvious was never seriously considered. Allied operations showed clear evidence of foreknowledge. The German failure to conceive of Bletchley Park's operation stemmed partly from their inability to imagine the technological and organizational innovations that made industrial-scale code-breaking possible. German cryptanalysts worked with paper, pencils, and mechanical calculating machines. The idea of electronic computation, machines that could test thousands of Enigma settings per hour, existed only in the realm of science fiction. By 1944, Bletchley Park had become the world's first industrial-scale computing center. The Colossus machines, designed by Tommy Flowers, and absolutely secret even within Bletchley Park, could process 5,000 characters per second. This was a speed that German mathematicians wouldn't have believed possible. The Baumé machines, developed from Polish designs by Alan Turing and Gordon Welchman, could test over 17,000 Enigma positions in 20 minutes. These mechanical marvels operated around the clock, their mechanical clicking filling huts with the sound of mathematical victory. The work would consume months if attempted by human code breakers alone. The organizational framework defied anything German minds could envision. By 1945, Bletchley Park housed more than 9,000 personnel. Women made up 80% of this workforce. They ran the machines day and night. They transcribed countless intercepts. They managed filing systems that tracked millions upon millions of decoded communications. Operations never stopped. 3 full shifts kept the facility running around the clock. At peak efficiency, They processed more than 3,000 intercepted messages every single day. Priority systems determined which messages got attention first. U-boat communications always topped the list for naval intelligence purposes. The methodical approach to breaking codes would have left German specialists speechless with amazement. Every single Enigma message that ever got decoded found its way into files. Cross-references connected each message to others. Patterns emerged from studying operator habits. Lazy radio operators used girlfriends' names as message keys. Weather reports followed predictable formats that provided valuable clues. Standard military phrases appeared again and again in routine messages. The British had turned code breaking into an industrial process. Germans still viewed it as an artistic endeavor requiring individual brilliance. German cryptanalysts would later express complete shock at the resources devoted to cracking Enigma. Dr. Erich Huttenhain faced interrogation by TICOM teams in 1945. When told about Bletchley Park's massive scale, he reportedly responded with stunned disbelief. "No wonder you managed to break it," he said. "You approached cryptanalysis like manufacturing bombers. Mass production methods? We treated it like composing poetry. Individual genius working alone." A moment of near discovery arrived on November 30th, 1943. A British Lancaster bomber fell from the sky near Berlin. German investigators combed through the wreckage. Among the twisted metal and scattered debris, they found something that should have triggered immediate panic. A partially burned document lay in the ruins. It contained what appeared to be German naval grid references. U-boat positions were listed with dates just 48 hours old. Hauptmann Wilhelm Dönitz of Luftwaffe Intelligence took charge of the investigation. The document fragments told a chilling story. 3 U-boats were clearly identified: U-391, U-238, and U-648. Their coordinates matched actual positions from November 28th. This intelligence was far too precise for aerial reconnaissance. Agent reports couldn't account for such recent accuracy. Something was very wrong. Dönitz conducted his investigation with thorough professionalism. His conclusions, however, led him down the wrong path entirely. He decided the British must operate an extensive spy network throughout French ports. Agents were reporting U-boat departures and arrivals. Combined with direction-finding equipment tracking German radio signals, this could theoretically produce rough position estimates. The possibility that British forces were actually reading German position reports did appear in his final report, but he dismissed it with a single, fatal sentence. Cryptographic compromise has been ruled out by technical experts. The close call sent waves of panic through Bletchley Park. They learned about German document recovery through their own ultra-intercepts. Emergency procedures went into effect immediately. For 3 full months afterward, ultra-intelligence came wrapped in even more elaborate cover stories. Any intelligence that couldn't be plausibly attributed to other sources got withheld from operational use entirely. June 6, 1944, marked Ultra's greatest triumph. The D-Day landings also represented the most complete failure in German intelligence history. The largest amphibious invasion ever attempted unfolded before German eyes. Over 6,000 vessels crowded the English Channel. The first wave alone carried 150,000 troops toward Normandy beaches. Yet German forces were caught completely unprepared. The preservation of tactical surprise when strategic surprise seemed impossible demonstrated total Allied intelligence dominance. Through ultra-intercepts, the Allies knew exactly what German commanders believed about everything. Every assessment from Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt reached Allied ears. Every defensive preparation ordered by Rommel got decoded at Bletchley Park. Every intelligence estimate submitted to Hitler was often read by the British before German recipients decoded their own copies. This knowledge allowed the Allies to craft deception operations with surgical precision. Operation Fortitude convinced Germans the main invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais. This deception succeeded because the Allies could monitor German reactions in real time through ultra-intercepts. When German intelligence reported strong Allied forces massing opposite Calais, they were seeing inflatable tanks and fictional radio traffic. The Allies could read German assessments of this fake buildup. When Germans expressed doubts, new evidence appeared to reinforce the deception. Even after D-Day began, ultra-intercepts revealed German commanders still believed Normandy was merely a diversion. Hitler refused to release panzer reserves from Calais for 7 crucial weeks. This decision stemmed partly from intelligence assessments that the Allies were reading and reinforcing through continued deception operations. German commanders weren't just surprised by the invasion. They were fighting a battle completely orchestrated by enemies who could read their every thought. Admiral Theodor Kranke commanded Naval Group West during the invasion. He would later write about the complete intelligence failure surrounding D-Day. "We knew absolutely nothing," he admitted. "Our reconnaissance was completely blind. Our intelligence was totally deaf. The enemy appeared from nowhere with overwhelming force. He never suspected the real problem wasn't that Germans knew nothing. The Allies knew everything." By late 1944, accumulating anomalies should have completely shattered German faith in their communications security. U-boats equipped with revolutionary snorkel technology could remain submerged for entire patrols. Yet they were still being caught with disturbing frequency. New acoustic torpedoes were countered before they could achieve significant success. Tactical innovations were met with immediate Allied adaptations that seemed almost supernatural. Yet German investigations continued finding alternative explanations for every failure. When snorkel boats were destroyed, investigators blamed improved Allied sonar systems. Magnetic anomaly detection equipment got credit for impossible intercepts. When new Wolfpack tactics failed repeatedly, they attributed failures to Allied air saturation of operational areas. When supply operations were consistently intercepted at impossible locations, they theorized about infrared detection of diesel exhaust. High-altitude photography was blamed for spotting wake patterns in open ocean. The most revealing incident occurred in March 1945. U-86 was destroyed off the American coast just days after departing Norway. The submarine had maintained complete radio silence throughout its journey. It used only snorkel technology while traveling underwater. The route was known only to U-boat command headquarters. Its destruction at precise coordinates should have been mathematically impossible without communications intelligence. Yet the German investigation concluded that American hunter-killer groups had achieved such density off their coast that detection had become inevitable. Captain Gunther Hessler served as Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of U-boat operations. He came closest to recognizing the truth in April 1945. During a staff meeting, he reportedly made a chilling observation. "Either the Americans have developed technology beyond our comprehension," he said, "or they are somehow reading our thoughts." The response from Admiral Dönitz, Dönitz's chief of staff, was swift and utterly dismissive. "Defeatist thinking will not be tolerated here," he declared. "Our communications remain completely secure." May 1945 brought the Third Reich's collapse. Allied intelligence teams raced across crumbling Germany in Operation Tycom. The Target Intelligence Committee was tasked with capturing German cryptographic personnel and materials. They had to work fast before everything could be destroyed or fall into Soviet hands. What they discovered was a fascinating mixture of sophisticated cryptanalytic capability combined with stunning blindness to their own vulnerabilities. The interrogation of Dr. Erich Huttenhain provided remarkable insights into German thinking throughout the war. He had served as chief cryptanalyst of OKW Chai. When Allied interrogators told him that they had been reading Enigma traffic since 1940, his first response was complete disbelief. Impossible, he insisted. The mathematical complexity is completely insurmountable. When shown actual decoded messages with German text in plain language, his shock was total and devastating. But this would require thousands of people, he stammered, resources beyond any rational imagination. When Allied interrogators explained the massive scale of Bletchley Park's operation, Huttenhain's response revealed the conceptual gap that had protected Ultra throughout the war. We calculated that breaking Enigma successfully would require more resources than any nation would rationally devote to cryptanalysis, he explained. We never imagined you would treat code breaking as a military priority, equivalent to building aircraft or training entire divisions. Wilhelm Trano had served as the brilliant B-Dienst cryptanalyst who successfully broke British convoy codes. His interrogation produced equally stunning admissions. During questioning, he admitted the uncomfortable truth that had haunted German intelligence. "We knew something was definitely wrong," he said. "Too many coincidences kept occurring. Too many lucky Allied discoveries happened at perfect moments. But whenever I suggested the possibility of cryptographic compromise, I was told I was being paranoid." Breaking Enigma was considered a mathematical impossibility. The interrogation of lower-level personnel revealed widespread suspicions that had been systematically suppressed throughout the war. Radio operators reported they had noticed patterns suggesting Allied foreknowledge of German operations. U-boat commanders had questioned how enemy convoys always seemed to zigzag away at the perfect moment to avoid contact. Intelligence analysts had documented statistical impossibilities in Allied success rates against German forces. But at every level of command, these legitimate concerns had been dismissed with the same inflexible response. Enigma simply cannot be broken. Perhaps most revealing was the interrogation of Korvettenkapitän Heinz Bonatz, who had served as head of B-Dienst. When Allied interrogators told him about Ultra's scope and success, he sat in complete silence for several long minutes. "Then we never had a chance from the beginning," he finally said. "From the moment you broke Enigma, the war was already lost." Everything else that followed, all the battles, all the tactics, all the sacrifices, was just delaying the inevitable end. The ultra-secret remained carefully protected by the Official Secrets Act until 1974. This created one of the most successful long-term security operations in intelligence history. Over 10,000 people who had worked at Bletchley Park maintained absolute silence for nearly 3 complete decades. They returned to civilian life unable to explain mysterious gaps in their employment history. They were forbidden from discussing their wartime service even with spouses. They were forced to listen to incorrect historical accounts of the war without being able to offer corrections. The secret's preservation served multiple important purposes beyond simple security. During the immediate post-war period, British and American intelligence services were using captured Enigma machines to establish secure communications with developing nations. These countries believed they were receiving state-of-the-art encryption technology from their new allies. More importantly, the revolutionary techniques developed at Bletchley Park were being applied to Soviet communications during the emerging Cold War. Revealing these capabilities would have compromised critical ongoing operations against the new enemy. The human cost of maintaining this silence was enormous and deeply personal. Brilliant cryptanalysts returned to quiet academic positions without any recognition for their groundbreaking work in computer science and advanced mathematics. Women who had operated the Bombay machines and Colossus computers were performing work that laid crucial foundations for the entire computer age. Yet they were unable to claim their rightful place in technological history. Veterans who had served at Bletchley Park faced skepticism about their war service from friends and family. They were unable to provide any meaningful details about their actual contributions to victory. Gordon Welchman had developed the diagonal board modification that made the Bombay machines truly effective at breaking Enigma. He emigrated to the United States after the war and worked in classified research projects. When he finally published his memoir, The Hut-6 Story, in 1982, he faced serious threats of prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. This happened despite the general declassification of ultra-information. He died in 1985, finally able to claim credit for innovations that had helped win the war. But he faced official government censure for revealing operational details that authorities still considered sensitive. The dam of secrecy finally broke in 1974. Group Captain F.W. Dönitz, T.B. Winterbotham published The Ultra-Secret that year. Winterbotham had overseen the special liaison units that distributed ultra-intelligence to field commanders throughout the war. He had fought for years to tell this incredible story. His motivations were complex and deeply personal. He sought personal vindication for his wartime service. He wanted historical accuracy about intelligence operations. He was concerned that crucial lessons about intelligence and modern warfare were being lost to history. The book's publication sent massive shockwaves through the historical community and surviving German military leadership. Historians suddenly had to completely revise their entire understanding of World War II. Battles that had been attributed to brilliant generalship or lucky reconnaissance were revealed as carefully planned intelligence operations. Allied commanders, who had seemed prescient and brilliant, were shown to have been reading their enemy's most secret communications. German defeat took on entirely new dimensions of tragedy and futility. For German veterans, the revelation was absolutely devastating on multiple levels. General Adolf Galland had commanded the Luftwaffe fighter force during critical years of the war. He reportedly said the revelation explained decades of confusion. For 30 years I have been wondering how the Allies always seemed to know exactly where we would be, he admitted. Now I finally know the truth. They were reading our orders before we received them ourselves. Admiral Dönitz's reaction was particularly complex and psychologically revealing. In his hastily written response to Winterbotham's publisher, he claimed to have always suspected communications compromise throughout the war. But this claim directly contradicted his own detailed war diary. It contradicted his post-war memoirs published years earlier. It contradicted testimony from subordinates who confirmed his absolute faith in Enigma's security throughout the entire conflict. The psychological need to retroactively claim suspicion revealed the depth of the wound to his professional pride. The most dramatic confrontation with the truth came at a 1978 intelligence history conference held in Germany. Former adversaries met publicly for the first time since the war's end. The conference was hosted by the German Marine Institute. It brought together British cryptanalysts from Bletchley Park with German intelligence officers who had operated Enigma systems throughout the war. The keynote session featured Harry Hinsley facing his former enemies. Hinsley had served as a Bletchley Park analyst during the war. He later became the official historian of British intelligence operations. He faced Wilhelm Trano and other B-Dienst veterans across a conference table. Hinsley's presentation methodically destroyed every German assumption about their wartime communication security. He showed original decoded messages with German text. He explained sophisticated cryptanalytic techniques in mathematical detail. He revealed the staggering scale of Allied code-breaking operations. The German response mixed professional admiration with devastating personal anguish. Trano maintained his composure throughout the technical presentation. He asked detailed questions about British mathematical methods. He was clearly impressed by the mathematical elegance of the cryptanalytic attacks on Enigma. But when discussion turned to operational consequences of the intelligence breakthrough, emotions erupted throughout the room. The most heated exchange occurred when Otto Kretschmer confronted former Dönitz staff officers. Kretschmer had been Germany's most successful U-boat commander before his capture. The staff officers were still defending their wartime decisions and strategies. They presented what they called the steamroller theory. German strategy had been designed to force the Allies to commit maximum resources regardless of any intelligence advantages. Kretschmer exploded with barely contained fury. "Steamroller strategy," he shouted across the conference room. "We were sending brave men to their deaths in operations the enemy knew about in advance. Every patrol order we received, every tactical innovation we attempted, every desperate attempt to turn the tide of battle, they knew it all before we did. And you still have the nerve to defend this as sound strategy?" The confrontation nearly became physical before conference organizers could intervene successfully. But Kretschmer's outburst voiced what many German veterans felt deep in their hearts. They had been betrayed not by enemies who fought them fairly, but by their own leadership's stubborn refusal to consider the possibility of cryptographic compromise when evidence mounted. In the years following Ultra's public revelation, German cryptographers conducted extensive post-mortems on Enigma's catastrophic failure. What they discovered was both technically reassuring and operationally disturbing. The system itself remained mathematically sound, even under intense scrutiny. But human implementation had created fatal vulnerabilities that skilled enemies could exploit. The Polish breakthrough in 1932 had exploited a critical procedural weakness in German operations. The Germans transmitted the message key indicator twice at the beginning of each encrypted message. This redundancy was intended to ensure accurate reception by distant radio operators, but it provided the crucial mathematical relationship that allowed Marian Rejewski to reconstruct the internal wiring of Enigma rotors using advanced permutation group theory. By the time Germans finally eliminated this dangerous practice in 1940, the Poles had already shared their breakthrough knowledge with British intelligence. The British success built on solid Polish foundations, but required massive technological innovation beyond anything Germans could imagine. The bomb machines designed by Turing and Welchman exploited the fundamental fact that no letter could encode to itself. This was a basic characteristic of Enigma's mechanical design. By testing possible rotor positions against probable plain text cribs, the bombs could eliminate impossible settings at electronic speeds far beyond human capability. German security procedures, though elaborate and seemingly thorough, actually aided British cryptanalysis in unexpected ways. The strict prohibition on repeating rotor positions for consecutive days meant British cryptanalysts could eliminate yesterday's settings from consideration when attacking new messages. Rigid formatting requirements for military messages provided predictable cribs that British analysts could exploit. Weather reports always began with identical phrases. Supply requests followed standard formats throughout the German military. Daily situation reports contained repetitive elements that appeared in message after message. Most damaging of all, German absolute confidence in Enigma security led to increasingly poor operational security practices. Messages were transmitted containing sensitive information that also appeared in other less secure communications. When B-Dienst successfully broke British convoy codes, German U-boat headquarters transmitted British convoy positions through Enigma networks. This provided perfect cribs for British cryptanalysts, who obviously knew their own convoy locations and could work backward to break the encryption. Military historians have spent decades carefully analyzing Ultra's impact on World War II's ultimate outcome. Harry Hinsley's official assessment concluded that Ultra shortened the war by at least 2 years, and possibly 4 complete years. This has become the accepted consensus view among serious scholars. But the implications extend far beyond simple temporal calculations. Ultra fundamentally changed the essential nature of warfare itself. For the first time in recorded history, one side could consistently read its opponent's most secret communications in near real time. This wasn't merely tactical advantage gained through superior equipment or training. It was strategic omniscience on an unprecedented scale. Every major German offensive from 1941 onward faced opponents who knew their detailed plans, exact strength, and often their specific objectives, days or weeks in advance. The Battle of the Atlantic provides the clearest statistical measure of Ultra's decisive impact. Military historians calculate that Ultra intelligence directly saved between 300 and 500 merchant ships from U-boat attacks. This represented approximately 1.5 to 2 million tons of vital shipping capacity. Without preventing these catastrophic losses, Britain would have faced complete starvation by mid-1941. The ability to route convoys around wolf-pack positions meant the literal difference between British survival and German victory. In North Africa, Ultra intelligence allowed Montgomery to fight the Battle of Alam el Halfa with perfect knowledge of Rommel's detailed plans. He positioned his forces exactly where Rommel intended to launch his main attack. This created devastating killing fields that destroyed German armor before it could properly maneuver. At Alamein, Montgomery knew German fuel supplies down to individual vehicle levels. Tank strength, defensive positions, supply schedules, everything was revealed through intercepted communications. The Normandy invasion succeeded partly because Ultra revealed exactly what German commanders believed about Allied intentions. Every German intelligence assessment concluding the invasion would come at Calais was read by Allied planners in real time. They adjusted their deception operations accordingly to reinforce German misconceptions. German reinforcement orders were known by Allied forces before local commanders received them. This allowed Allied air power to interdict German units before they could reach the front lines. The most tragic aspect of German ignorance about Ultra was the enormous human cost in lives. Hundreds of thousands of German servicemen died in military operations that were doomed from the moment of conception. Their orders had been decoded and read by enemies before they themselves received those same orders. U-boat crews suffered the highest proportional losses of any German military service. 75% casualties among the 40,000 brave men who served in submarines. They sailed into naval battles where Allied forces knew their exact positions in advance. Enemy ships knew their fuel states, their torpedo loadings, and their intended targets before attacks began. They fought with incredible bravery against impossible odds. They never knew the odds were impossible because their enemies could read their most secret communications. Luftwaffe pilots flew directly into ambushes that had been prepared days in advance using intercepted flight orders. Transport aircraft carrying desperately needed supplies to encircled ground forces were intercepted with such mathematical regularity that air crews called themselves flying coffins. Fighter units discovered that Allied bomber formations consistently avoided their patrol areas, while striking completely undefended targets. This wasn't luck or superior reconnaissance. This was decoded deployment orders directing the timing. Wehrmacht soldiers fought pitched battles, where their opponents knew their exact strength, their tactical objectives, and often their precise time of attack down to the minute. The destruction of entire divisions in Tunisia, the collapse of carefully prepared defensive lines throughout Italy, the failure of every major counteroffensive from Kursk to the Ardennes, all were directly influenced by Allied foreknowledge gained through ultra-intercepts. For German military professionals who finally learned about Ultra in 1974, the psychological impact was absolutely profound and life-changing. Their entire understanding of the war required complete revision from beginning to end. Military defeats that had been attributed to material inferiority or tactical errors were revealed as fundamental intelligence failures. Heroes who had died making desperate attacks had been sailing or flying directly into carefully prepared traps. Their enemies had been reading their orders in advance. General Heinz Guderian had pioneered blitzkrieg warfare before and during World War II. He wrote in a private letter discovered after his death about learning the Ultra secret. Learning about Ultra was like discovering your entire life was actually a stage play where everyone else knew the script except you, he wrote. Every decision I made as a commander, every order I gave to subordinates, every tactical plan I developed, the enemy knew it all in advance. We were not generals commanding armies in battle. We were actors performing for an audience that knew our every line before we spoke. For Admiral Dönitz, who lived until 1980, the revelation completely colored his final years of life. Close associates reported he became increasingly withdrawn from social contact. He spent long hours recalculating old naval battles with the terrible new knowledge that his communications had been completely compromised throughout the war. His final manuscript, which was never published, reportedly contained extensive revisions to his understanding of the entire U-boat war. He acknowledged that no amount of submarines or tactical innovation could possibly have succeeded against an enemy that was reading every single order he issued. The psychological impact extended far beyond military leaders to ordinary veterans throughout Germany. U-boat survivors formed special support groups to process the devastating knowledge that their military service had been doomed by communications intelligence rather than battlefield failure. Luftwaffe pilots had to revise their understanding of why they had been consistently outnumbered at crucial interception points throughout the air war. Wehrmacht veterans realized their enormous sacrifices had been magnified by intelligence failures at the highest levels of German command. The German failure to detect Enigma's compromise offers profound lessons about institutional blindness and the terrible dangers of absolute certainty in military affairs. The Wehrmacht's investigation apparatus was sophisticated, thorough, and staffed by intelligent, dedicated professionals throughout the war. Yet they failed completely to identify the real problem because they couldn't question their most fundamental assumptions about communications security. Every single investigation started with the unshakable premise that Enigma was mathematically secure. All evidence was interpreted through this inflexible lens. Alternative explanations were forced to fit the predetermined conclusion that the encryption system could not be broken. When multiple supply ships were destroyed at remote coordinates that should have been secret, investigators looked for networks of spies, improved radar technology, and enhanced reconnaissance capabilities. They refused to consider communications compromise as a possibility. When convoys consistently evaded wolf pack formations positioned to intercept them, German analysts blamed Allied air coverage saturation rather than questioning whether patrol positions were known in advance. The compartmentalization that was designed to protect Enigma actually prevented comprehensive security analysis that might have revealed the truth. Cryptographers assured field operators that the system was mathematically unbreakable through rigorous proof. The systematic deception ran deeper than anyone imagined. Field operators provided assurances that standard protocols were being followed correctly. Those same operators reported upward to commanders who confirmed all security measures remained intact. Commanders then assured their superiors that protective systems functioned perfectly. High command received these reports and felt confident that operational security was bulletproof. The chain of assurance created a deadly illusion. Each level trusted the expertise below. Each level reported success to the level above. Nobody within this vertical structure possessed the authority to challenge the entire framework. Anyone bold enough to question fundamental assumptions faced immediate institutional pushback. The system protected itself from scrutiny. German technical arrogance became their greatest weakness. Deep cultural belief in Germanic engineering superiority created massive blind spots in strategic thinking. Mathematical precision was considered a uniquely German strength. Technical innovation was viewed as a German monopoly. When mounting evidence suggested Allied cryptographic capabilities might exceed German expectations, the response was predictable. German analysts looked for increasingly complex explanations rather than accept the simple truth. Enemy convoys seemed to evade U-boat wolf packs with impossible precision. Supply ships appeared to change course at exactly the right moments. Remote coordinates that should have been secret somehow became known to Allied forces. Each incident demanded explanation. German intelligence created elaborate theories about radar improvements, direction-finding advances, and spy networks. The possibility that Allies possessed superior code-breaking capabilities was never seriously considered. Warning signs appeared throughout the conflict, like breadcrumbs leading to the truth. Each warning represented a chance to discover what institutional blindness prevented them from seeing. German leadership consistently dismissed or misinterpreted every signal. The opportunities slipped away one after another. February 1942 brought the first major red flag. The German naval attaché stationed in Tokyo sent an alarming report back to Berlin. American naval forces seemed to possess detailed advanced knowledge of Japanese maritime operations. Intelligence was too specific to be coincidental. Timing was too precise to be lucky guesses. The pattern suggested systematic intelligence gathering on an unprecedented scale. Berlin's response revealed the depth of their cognitive blindness. German high command dismissed the Tokyo report as Japanese excuse-making. Pacific defeats needed explanations that preserved German confidence in Axis capabilities. Admitting American intelligence superiority would raise uncomfortable questions. If Americans could read Japanese codes with such precision, what prevented them from reading German codes with equal success? The logical connection was too threatening to contemplate. Swiss intelligence delivered an even more explicit warning in August 1943. Neutral observers had noticed patterns that suggested German naval codes were thoroughly compromised. The message was direct and specific. Allied forces demonstrated foreknowledge that could only come from reading encrypted German communications. German intelligence services responded by investigating the messenger rather than the message. They concluded Swiss sources had been fed deliberate misinformation by Allied intelligence operations. The possibility that neutral Swiss observers had simply recognized obvious patterns was rejected. The substance of the warning was ignored, while resources were wasted tracking down false leads. Even within German intelligence services, individual suspicions were systematically crushed. When B-Dienst analyst Lieutenant Friedrich compiled statistical analysis showing impossible patterns in convoy routing, his mathematical conclusions were damning. Allied ships avoided German submarine positions with precision that defied probability. Course changes happened at exactly the right moments to escape prepared ambushes. The numbers told a clear story of compromised communications. Friedrich's report was buried with a dismissive notation. Mathematical analysis alone could not determine intelligence sources. His superiors preferred comfortable assumptions to uncomfortable truths. When U-boat commanders returned from patrols reporting that Allied convoys seemed to anticipate their positions, they received lectures about maintaining proper radio discipline. The possibility that their radio messages were being intercepted and decoded in real time was never explored. The greatest irony of the entire Enigma story lies buried in German cryptographic success. While Germany remained completely blind to Enigma's compromise, their own B-Dienst achieved remarkable intelligence victories throughout the war. German cryptanalysts successfully broke numerous Allied communication systems. They read British convoy routing codes with impressive consistency. American diplomatic traffic yielded valuable intelligence about Allied strategic planning. Soviet military communications were penetrated at various points during the conflict. These intelligence victories should have taught German leadership crucial lessons about cryptographic vulnerability. If German experts could break Allied codes despite their sophistication, Allied experts might possess similar capabilities against German systems. Communication security was always fragile. Cryptanalytic success was possible with sufficient resources and determination. No encryption system was absolutely invulnerable. Instead, German cryptographic success reinforced their dangerous blindness. B-Dienst analysts knew intimately how difficult code-breaking actually was. They understood the massive resources required for consistent results. They experienced frequent failures when Allied forces changed their encryption keys. They knew the difference between occasional success and systematic penetration. This hard-won knowledge became a liability when projected onto Allied capabilities. German experts assumed their enemies faced identical limitations. If Germany struggled to maintain consistent access to Allied communications despite enormous effort, surely the Allies faced even greater challenges attacking the mathematically superior Enigma system. This logical assumption contained a fatal flaw. German cryptanalysts were projecting their own limitations onto an enemy who had industrialized the entire process. Wilhelm Trano's success reading British convoy codes provided a perfect example of this dangerous reasoning. Trano understood exactly how precarious cryptographic victories could be. Even with captured code books providing initial access, maintaining continuous intelligence required constant effort. Codes changed frequently, breaking continuity. New keys demanded fresh cryptanalytic work. Success was temporary and fragile. Trano could not imagine that Allied codebreakers had transformed cryptanalysis from individual art into industrial science. He thought in terms of brilliant individuals working with limited resources. The Allies had created factory-like operations with thousands of personnel, mechanical computation devices, and systematic approaches that guaranteed consistent results. The scale was beyond German imagination. B-Dienst's tactical intelligence successes ultimately accelerated their strategic intelligence defeat. Reading Allied convoy codes allowed precise positioning of U-boat wolf packs for maximum effectiveness. These positions were then transmitted through Enigma channels to submarines waiting in patrol areas. Each tactical success provided perfect cribs for Bletchley Park analysts working to break German naval encryption. German tactical victories gave their enemies exactly the known plaintext needed to solve Enigma keys faster. The more successful German intelligence became at reading Allied communications, the more intelligence they provided to Allied cryptanalysts working against German systems. Success bred failure in ways German leadership never suspected. When Ultra's existence was finally revealed in 1974, German military historians faced the devastating task of reassessing every major operation of World War II. Traditional narratives of German military competence versus Allied material superiority crumbled under scrutiny. The Africa Corps defeats in North Africa required complete reinterpretation. Rommel's supply difficulties were not just the result of Allied numerical superiority or Mediterranean geography. Allied forces knew exactly when and where German supply ships would arrive because they were reading the orders directing those ships. Supply interdiction became surgical precision rather than lucky accidents. Tactical innovations failed because Montgomery received copies of Rommel's battle plans before German divisional commanders saw their orders. The Battle of Kursk demanded similar re-examination. The largest tank engagement in military history had been analyzed for decades as a demonstration of Soviet defensive preparation and German tactical exhaustion. Ultra-intelligence revealed a different story entirely. Soviet forces knew the exact timing, strength, and objectives of German offensive operations weeks before they began. What appeared as brilliant Soviet defensive positioning was actually foreknowledge provided through British-supplied ultra-intelligence. The information was carefully laundered through the Lucy spy ring operating from Switzerland to conceal its true source. Soviet commanders weren't displaying tactical genius. They were reading German orders. The Atlantic Wall's failure to prevent D-Day landings required fundamental reinterpretation. Every aspect of German defensive preparation was transparent to Allied planners reading the most secret German communications. Rommel's obstacle placement, Rundstedt's reserve positioning, Hitler's strategic assumptions about Allied intentions, all were known in detail to the enemies preparing to attack those defenses. The Atlantic Wall hadn't failed because of Allied material superiority or tactical innovation. It had failed because its every weakness was mapped, analyzed, and exploited by an enemy with complete intelligence about German defensive preparations. Allied planners knew where German guns were positioned, where reserves were located, and how German commanders expected to respond to various attack scenarios. Even apparent German victories required reassessment through the lens of ultra-intelligence. The initial success of the Ardennes offensive in December 1944 had long been attributed to tactical surprise and Allied complacency. The reality was more complex. Bad weather had prevented ultra-intelligence from reaching forward Allied commanders in time to prevent initial German breakthroughs. When weather conditions cleared and normal communication channels resumed operations, Allied forces knew exactly where German spearheads were heading. Reserve positioning became precise rather than reactive. German tactical momentum was blunted by enemies who could read their operational orders and position forces accordingly. As the 1970s progressed, aging German intelligence officers learned about Ultra and provided invaluable testimony about their wartime experience of systematic blindness. Historians collected these accounts before the generation passed away completely. Their insights offer unique perspectives on the psychology of intelligence failure. Heinz Bonatz, who served as head of B-Dienst during critical war years, admitted painful truths in a 1979 interview. His words carried the weight of bitter hindsight and professional regret. The German intelligence community had been too clever for its own survival. Their expertise in cryptanalytic matters prevented them from imagining that anyone possessed superior capabilities. They observed patterns that clearly suggested systematic compromise of their communication security. However, they consistently explained away obvious evidence with increasingly elaborate alternative theories. The simple truth that enemies were reading their most secret messages was too psychologically devastating to contemplate seriously. Professional pride became professional blindness. Dr. Erich Huttenhein, who served as the Wehrmacht's chief cryptanalyst throughout the war, reflected on the fundamental assumptions that had doomed German communication security. His 1976 comments revealed the technical arrogance that had blinded German experts to Allied capabilities. The mathematical foundations of Enigma encryption were absolutely correct, given the computational resources German experts imagined were available to potential enemies. German cryptanalysts never conceived that British forces would devote thousands of personnel and millions of pounds to systematic code-breaking operations. They approached the problem like engineers focused on technical elegance rather than enemies fighting desperately for national survival. The scale of Allied commitment was beyond German imagination or experience. Otto Kretschmer, the legendary U-boat ace who survived the war after his capture in 1941, provided perhaps the most emotionally powerful reflection on Ultra's revelation. His words carried the anguish of a professional warrior discovering that his courage had been systematically betrayed by intelligence failures at the highest levels of command. German submariners had sailed into death, believing they were warriors engaged in tactical combat. They were actually victims of their leadership's institutional blindness to communications compromise. Every patrol was compromised before submarines left port. Every tactical innovation was known to enemies before implementation began. German sailors fought with tremendous courage against mathematical analysis rather than naval opponents. Mathematics had won decisively. The children and grandchildren of German World War II veterans faced their own difficult reckoning when Ultra's existence became public knowledge. Many had grown up hearing stories of heroic sacrifice against overwhelming material odds. Learning that their relatives had been systematically deceived by failures at the highest levels of German intelligence created complex and painful emotional responses. Hans-Peter Dönitz, Admiral Dönitz's grandson, explored these family trauma in his 2003 memoir. His grandfather had gone to his grave believing he had done everything humanly possible to win the Battle of the Atlantic. Learning about Ultra's existence forced the entire Dönitz family to confront a completely different historical narrative, one where the Admiral's greatest tactical innovation, centralized control through radio communication, had become the primary instrument of his fleet's systematic destruction. The Admiral hadn't been a foolish commander, but he had been completely fooled by his own technological certainty. His professional competence had been betrayed by institutional failures beyond his knowledge or control. This realization created profound emotional complexity for family members trying to understand their relatives' wartime service. German veterans associations struggled intensely to process Ultra's implications for their members' wartime experiences. The U-Boat Veterans Association, known as Verband Deutscher U-Boot-Fahrer, held special educational sessions throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Professional historians explained Ultra's role in the Battle of the Atlantic to audiences of aging submariners who had risked their lives believing in German tactical superiority. Many veterans initially rejected this information completely. They were unable to accept that their enormous sacrifices had been magnified unnecessarily by systematic intelligence failures at command levels. The psychological cost of acknowledging such comprehensive deception was too great for immediate acceptance. Others found strange comfort in learning that their tactical defeats weren't due to personal failures or inadequate courage, but rather to systematic communications compromise at the highest strategic levels. The revelation of Enigma's compromise influenced post-war German cryptographic development in profound and lasting ways. The Bundeswehr, established in 1955, implemented communications security protocols specifically designed to prevent another Enigma-style intelligence catastrophe. German military cryptographers completely abandoned any assumption of cryptographic invulnerability. Instead, they designed systems assuming all communications could potentially be compromised and implemented defensive measures accordingly. Multiple encryption systems were used simultaneously for critical communications. Important information was deliberately fragmented across different communication channels to prevent complete intelligence compromise. Radio silence became standard operational procedure, except when communication was absolutely necessary for immediate tactical requirements. This represented a complete reversal of the Wehrmacht's reliance on continuous communication and centralized command control. The psychological impact on German intelligence services persisted for decades after the war ended. The BND, West Germany's primary intelligence service, operated with almost paranoid communication security protocols. Excessive caution sometimes hampered operational effectiveness, but institutional memory of Enigma's catastrophic compromise created a culture that prioritized security over convenience. The trauma of discovering Enigma's complete penetration created institutional mindsets that assumed communications compromise rather than communications security. This defensive approach influenced German intelligence operations throughout the Cold War period and continues to shape German security practices today. Professional military historians spent the decades following Ultra's revelation completely reconsidering World War II's towards European theater operations. Battles that had been analyzed for tactical lessons required complete reinterpretation, knowing that one side possessed consistent intelligence superiority. The German General Staff's vaunted operational excellence appeared much less impressive when their opponents knew German battle plans in advance. The Wehrmacht's early victories from 1939 to 1941, achieved before consistent ultra-intelligence became available, stood in stark contrast to the systematic defeats from 1942 to 1945, when Enigma was thoroughly compromised. This timeline correlation provided clear evidence of intelligence impact on operational outcomes. Individual German commanders required fundamental reassessment of their historical reputations. Rommel's standing as the Desert Fox survived partially intact because his tactical brilliance remained evident even when strategically compromised by ultra-intelligence. His ability to improvise and adapt to changing battlefield conditions transcended intelligence disadvantages. However, other commanders, particularly Admiral Dönitz, saw their historical standings significantly diminished. His innovative wolf-pack tactics and centralized command structure, once considered revolutionary advances in naval warfare, were revealed as fatal vulnerabilities that accelerated German defeat. The very innovations that seemed most promising actually provided Allied codebreakers with the communication traffic needed to break German naval encryption. Allied commanders also required reassessment in light of ultra-intelligence revelations. Montgomery's methodical approach at El Alamein appeared less cautious and more calculated, knowing he possessed complete intelligence about German positions, strength, and tactical intentions. Eisenhower's broad front strategy seemed more reasonable given ultra-intelligence about German reserve locations and defensive plans. What had appeared as exceptional generalship was often exceptional intelligence advantage. This realization didn't diminish Allied achievements, but provided more accurate understanding of how victories were actually achieved. Intelligence superiority was as decisive as material superiority in determining strategic outcomes. Despite extensive post-war analysis by professional historians and intelligence experts, one central mystery continues to puzzle researchers. How did German intelligence services, generally competent and occasionally brilliant in other areas, fail so completely to detect Enigma's compromise despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence accumulating over several years? The answer lies not in individual professional incompetence, but rather in systematic institutional blindness created by multiple reinforcing psychological and organizational factors. Computational certainty had hardened into unquestionable dogma. Technical pride prevented serious consideration of Allied cryptographic superiority. Institutional momentum systematically suppressed individual doubts and concerns. Rigid compartmentalization prevented comprehensive analysis that might have revealed the true scope of communications compromise. Alternative explanations for suspicious patterns, however unlikely they might seem in retrospect, always appeared more psychologically acceptable than acknowledging total communications failure. Most fundamentally, the psychological cost of accepting Enigma's systematic compromise would have been psychologically unbearable for German leadership. It would mean acknowledging that every operational plan had been transparent to enemies. Every tactical innovation had been compromised before implementation could begin. Every order had sent thousands of men to predictable death against enemies who knew German intentions in advance. The human mind naturally rebels against such terrible knowledge. Any alternative explanation becomes preferable to confronting systematic and comprehensive intelligence failure of such magnitude. Denial becomes a psychological defense mechanism against unbearable truth. In 1979, 5 years after Ultra's public revelation, and 1 year before his death, Admiral Dönitz granted his final interview about the intelligence failure that had systematically destroyed his U-boat fleet. Aged 88, the last Führer of the Third Reich had spent 5 years wrestling with knowledge that his every command had been completely transparent to his enemies. When asked directly whether he had suspected communications compromise during the war, his response carried traces of the Prussian authority that had once commanded respect and fear. Of course, he had suspected something was wrong. All competent commanders experienced suspicions when operations consistently failed to achieve expected results. However, suspicion and certain knowledge were entirely different psychological states. To suspect that enemies possessed tactical advantages was simply prudent military thinking. To know with certainty that every thought was immediately revealed to opponents was a form of strategic madness that no commander could acknowledge and continue to function effectively. The distinction was crucial for understanding how intelligent professionals could miss obvious truths. He paused during the interview, looking through the window of his Aumühle apartment at the peaceful German countryside. The pastoral landscape was completely different from the Atlantic battleground, where so many of his men had died beneath the waves. His reflection turned to the fundamental question of whether knowledge of Enigma's compromise could have changed the war's outcome. His answer was brutally honest. By the time Enigma was thoroughly broken in 1941, the war's ultimate outcome was already determined by larger strategic factors. However, German forces might have lost differently with better intelligence security. Lives could have been saved by changing tactical approaches. Defensive positions might have been more effective than offensive operations. Reality might have been acknowledged instead of fighting phantom enemies. The greatest tragedy, he continued, was not that Germany had lost the war, but rather that German leadership never understood why they were consistently losing. They blamed technological inferiority, resource shortages, air power dominance, and every factor except the actual truth. 30,000 of his submariners had died in operations that enemies knew about before his own command headquarters received their operational orders. His submariners had died bravely, fighting enemies who could read German thoughts before they were fully formed. The courage and sacrifice had been real, but it had been systematically betrayed by intelligence failures at the highest levels of command. Professional competence had been undermined by institutional blindness. His final words about Ultra carried the accumulated weight of bitter professional experience and personal loss. In warfare, the greatest enemy was often not the opposing military force, but rather one's own absolute certainty about fundamental assumptions. German leadership had been completely certain that Enigma provided unbreakable communication security. That technological certainty had killed more German personnel than all the depth charges and aircraft in the entire Allied arsenal combined. Certainty itself had become the most deadly enemy of German strategic success. The lesson transcended military applications and applied to any situation where lives depended on accurate assessment of capabilities and vulnerabilities. The final statistical accounting of Enigma's impact reveals the true magnitude of German institutional blindness through numbers that tell a story of systematic intelligence catastrophe. Over 100,000 Enigma machines were manufactured between 1920 and 1945 for military and diplomatic use. The three-rotor Wehrmacht version offered 159 quintillion theoretical configurations for encoding messages. The four-rotor naval M4 variant provided 10 to the 23rd power possible configurations, a number so large as to be essentially infinite from a practical cryptanalytic perspective. Daily key changes required fresh solutions every 24 hours, theoretically making systematic code breaking impossible. Over 1,200 different radio networks used distinct Enigma keys by 1944, creating multiple layers of encryption security. The Allied code-breaking operation that defeated this mathematical fortress began with the Polish Cipher Bureau's initial breakthrough in December 1932. Bletchley Park became fully operational in August 1939 with a small staff of academic cryptanalysts and clerical support personnel. By January 1945, peak staffing reached 9,000 personnel, with 80% being women recruited from universities and civilian professions. 200 bombing machines were operational by war's end, providing mechanical assistance for systematic key recovery. 10 Colossus computers were built, representing the world's first programmable electronic computers designed specifically for cryptanalytic purposes. Daily intercept capacity reached over 5,000 messages by 1944, with average processing time from intercept to decoded intelligence reduced to 2.5 hours by 1945. German naval losses directly attributable to ultra-intelligence were staggering in their scope and consistency. 783 U-boats were lost from 1,162 commissioned during the war, representing a 67.4% loss rate that was unsustainable for any military organization. 30,000 submarine personnel were killed from approximately 40,000 who served, creating a 75% casualty rate that decimated entire training classes. May 1943 alone witnessed the loss of 41 U-boats, earning the designation Black May in German naval history. Ultra-intelligence enabled convoy routing that saved an estimated 14.67 million tons of Allied shipping from submarine attack. Over 500 merchant ships were saved through evasive routing based directly on decoded German operational orders. The Luftwaffe suffered similarly catastrophic losses, with 76,825 aircraft destroyed throughout the war. Ultra-intelligence contributed significantly to Allied targeting effectiveness and defensive preparations. 237 U-boats were lost during 1943, the peak year of Ultra's operational effectiveness against German naval operations. German security investigations that failed to detect Enigma's compromise numbered at least 15 major efforts between 1941 and 1945. B-Dienst made 3 separate attempts to break their own naval Enigma system to test its security, but all attempts failed due to insufficient resources and incomplete understanding of Allied cryptanalytic capabilities. 5 different alternative theories were pursued to explain suspicious patterns in Allied tactical success. These included improved radar technology, infrared detection systems, enhanced direction-finding capabilities, expanded spy networks, and systematic treachery by German personnel. Zero investigations seriously considered the possibility of systematic Enigma compromise. One explicit warning from Swiss intelligence in August 1943 was dismissed outright as Allied disinformation. Multiple internal suspicions were systematically suppressed at various command levels to maintain institutional confidence in communications security. The post-war impact of Ultra's revelation created a 30-year period of absolute secrecy, maintained from 1945 to 1974. Over 10,000 Bletchley Park personnel maintained complete silence about their wartime service, despite enormous personal sacrifice and professional achievement. Hundreds of historical accounts required fundamental revision when the truth finally emerged. Official British historians estimated that ultra-intelligence shortened the war by 2 to 4 years, saving countless lives on all sides. Thousands of German veterans were forced to completely reconceptualize their wartime service and sacrifice in light of intelligence revelations that changed everything they thought they knew about their combat experience. The story of German blindness to Enigma's compromise offers timeless warnings about the persistent dangers of absolute certainty in intelligence and security matters. It demonstrates with devastating clarity how competent and intelligent professionals can systematically miss obvious truths when institutional blindness reinforces psychologically comfortable assumptions. Modern intelligence services throughout the world study the Enigma failure as a primary cautionary tale about cognitive bias and the dangers of unexamined security assumptions. The United States National Security Agency includes detailed analysis in training programs designed to prevent similar institutional blindness. British GCHQ uses the case study to teach the critical importance of challenging fundamental premises about cryptographic security. Military academies worldwide analyze Enigma's compromise as the supreme historical example of intelligence failure, despite overwhelming evidence suggesting systematic problems. The lessons transcend cryptography and apply to any situation where lives depend on accurate assessment of capabilities and vulnerabilities. The German failure was not fundamentally technological in nature. Their cryptographic mathematics were mathematically sound and theoretically unbreakable, given the computational resources they assumed were available to potential enemies. The failure was not procedural, as their security protocols were elaborate and generally well executed by trained personnel. The failure was not intellectual, since German cryptanalysts were recognized among the world's most capable professionals. The failure was psychological and institutional, representing the systematic inability to question fundamental assumptions despite mounting evidence that those assumptions were catastrophically wrong. In our modern era of cyber warfare and electronic surveillance, the Enigma story carries renewed relevance for anyone responsible for communications security. Every system assumed to be secure, every communication believed to be private, every encryption considered unbreakable should be questioned with the knowledge that somewhere, someone may be reading what was intended to remain secret. The Germans' absolute certainty in Enigma's security killed thousands of their own personnel and prolonged a devastating war. Similar technological certainty in modern communication systems could prove equally catastrophic for contemporary organizations and nations that assume their secrets remain secret. Today, Bletchley Park operates as a museum dedicated to preserving one of history's greatest intelligence triumphs and Germany's most consequential intelligence failure. The huts where young men and women broke the unbreakable cipher have been carefully preserved for future generations to study and understand. The bombing machines have been reconstructed to demonstrate the mechanical ingenuity that automated key recovery. The story is finally told in complete detail after decades of enforced silence that protected methods and sources long after the war ended. Museum visitors walk through cramped spaces where mathematical genius combined with industrial organization to achieve what German experts had considered mathematically impossible. They observe the working conditions where thousands of personnel labored in absolute secrecy, knowing they possessed war-winning intelligence, but remaining unable to speak of their achievements even to immediate family members. They learn how an eccentric collection of mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, and crossword puzzle experts successfully industrialized cryptanalysis and fundamentally changed the nature of modern warfare. The transformation from individual genius to mass production represented a paradigm shift that German experts never anticipated or understood. Perhaps the museum's most powerful exhibit is also its simplest presentation. An actual four-rotor naval Enigma machine captured from U-505 is displayed in complete working condition. Visitors can encode messages themselves, watching the rotors turn and indicator lights illuminate, experiencing the same mechanical precision that convinced German cryptographers of absolute security. They can understand through direct experience how something so mechanically complex, so mathematically sophisticated, and so carefully protected by elaborate security protocols could still be systematically broken by determined enemies with sufficient resources, imagination, and industrial commitment to the cryptanalytic challenge. The machine stands as a permanent monument to a fundamental truth that transcends its historical context. In intelligence and warfare, as in all aspects of human endeavor, the greatest danger comes not from what we don't know, but rather from what we're absolutely certain we know, that subsequently proves to be completely wrong. The Germans were completely certain that Enigma provided unbreakable communication security. That technological certainty, more than any Allied weapon system or strategic innovation, ultimately ensured their systematic defeat in the intelligence war that determined battlefield outcomes. In the museum's guest book, among thousands of entries from visitors representing countries worldwide, one particular entry stands out for its emotional impact and historical significance. Written in neat German script in 1995, 50 years after the war's end, it provides a personal perspective on Ultra's revelation. The entry reads simply, "My grandfather commanded U-604, lost with all hands in August 1943. For 50 years, I believed he died fighting against overwhelming Allied technological superiority. Now, I understand he died because his operational orders were being read by enemies before he himself received them. The tragedy is not that Germany lost the war, but that we never knew we had already lost it before major battles even began." The entry concludes with a signature that speaks to the continuing emotional impact of Ultra's revelation on German families. A German grandson who finally understands the truth. This personal testimony represents thousands of similar family reckonings with historical truth that contradicted decades of comfortable assumptions about wartime sacrifice and military competence. The comprehensive story of how Germans never discovered that Allies had systematically cracked Enigma ultimately transcends its specific historical context. It serves as a universal cautionary tale about the persistent frailty of human certainty, the institutional dangers of systematic blindness, and the devastating costs that result from refusing to question fundamental assumptions when mounting evidence suggests those assumptions may be wrong. The story reminds us that in intelligence gathering, in military planning, and in all critical decision-making processes, the most dangerous enemy is often our own unexamined certainty about what we believe to be absolutely true. Professional competence and technical expertise provide no protection against institutional blindness when psychological comfort takes precedence over objective analysis. The 30,000 German submariners who died beneath Atlantic waves, the thousands of Luftwaffe pilots shot from skies where enemies knew exactly where they would appear, and the Wehrmacht soldiers who fought predetermined battles orchestrated by opponents reading their orders in real time, all became victims not merely of military defeat, but of an intelligence failure so comprehensive that it remained completely hidden from those who most desperately needed to recognize and understand it. The secret of Ultra's existence was successfully maintained for 30 years after the war ended. But the greater secret, how German certainty about their communications security systematically blinded them to obvious evidence of systematic compromise, offers lessons that remain urgently relevant as long as nations maintain secrets and assume their communications remain secure from enemy intelligence operations. The Enigma machine, once the supreme pride of German cryptographic ingenuity and mathematical precision, now stands throughout museums worldwide as history's greatest monument to the persistent danger of absolute certainty in an inherently uncertain world. The Germans never knew their thoughts were transparent to their enemies. That ignorance, carefully maintained despite overwhelming evidence suggesting otherwise, represents one of history's most consequential and instructive intelligence failures. In the final analysis, Allied cryptanalysts didn't simply break Enigma's mathematical complexity. They accomplished something far more significant. They broke Enigma while maintaining such perfect operational security that their enemies never suspected their most secret thoughts had become an open book for Allied strategic planning. That extraordinary achievement, preserved through the disciplined silence of thousands of personnel and the careful choreography of strategic deception operations, stands as perhaps the greatest intelligence victory in the entire history of organized warfare. The implications continue to resonate in our contemporary world, where communications security remains as crucial as it was during World War II. The story ends precisely where it began, with an elderly admiral sitting in stunned silence in 1974, holding a book that revealed truths completely destroying everything he had believed about why Germany lost the war at sea. Admiral Dönitz's shocked silence that day represented more than grief for the men he had lost, or acceptance that the war had been doomed from the moment Enigma was broken. It was the profound silence of recognition that certainty itself had been the ultimate enemy, and that in warfare, as in all human endeavors, what we don't know can destroy us more completely than any enemy force we can identify and engage in direct combat.